Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today we are going to take a look at the Sivga SV023 open back around ear dynamic driver headphone that lists for $449 US from a variety of retailers. This particular unit is a loan from Audio46. It was first sent to Mr. Errett, and he has a review up for it, so I'll link to his review down below. And then it went to Signcraft Audio, who also did a review, so I will link to that video down below. And then it got sent to me. Now, I have no direct affiliation, nor have I had any direct contact with anyone at Audio46, and nor have I talked to Sivga about this headphone ever. So neither of those companies have made any attempt to influence my opinion on this piece. So everything you're about to hear is my opinion and my opinion alone. All right, so we will go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we will come back and dive into the review of the Sivga SV023. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. Okay, Sivga SV023. What is it? As I said in the intro, it is a dynamic driver open back headphone, and it's an interesting piece because of the impedance on the driver. So this is a 300 ohm headphone. So the impedance on the drivers here is 300 ohms, and it has a rated sensitivity of 105 decibels, which I think is per milliwatt. It could be per 1 volt input. The website, or Sivga's website, did not say, but that's a fairly high sensitivity rating either way. So the 300 ohm impedance here puts it in an interesting space, okay, particularly at $450 US. Because to me, that means that, I interpret that anyway, to mean that Sivga is trying to get in and compete in the space that things like the Sennheiser HD600 series does. Like, this is my Massdrop plus Sennheiser HD6XX, which is essentially a Sennheiser HD650. So I have that here for comparison. This is also a 300 ohm headphone. The HD600 and HD650 both usually sell for around $300-400 US. This one right now is in the 250-ish range, I think, from Massdrop's website. And then I also think that they're trying to compete with a lot of the Beyerdynamics that are 250 or 600 ohms and all that, because Beyer has several models that are, around $450 plus or minus some, a little bit in price. I have one of their 600 ohm models here. This is the DT880 that I have dual entry detachable cable modded. Okay, so again, I think that Sivga is trying to put a competitor into the ergonomic and sonic space that models like these guys are in. Okay, so that is not a super crowded space these days. I mean, you have Sennheisers and you have Beyerdynamics that are dynamic driver open backs that are high impedance. You have like a model or two from AKG and a model or two from Audio-Technica in this price range. You go up a little bit, you get into ZMF headphones, which are mostly 300 ohm dynamic driver, but those are usually considerably more expensive, all that. So all of that means that this is it's a new option in that category. So we're going to dive into how that stacks up here. Okay, so then let's talk about the build and construction of this. We see that it has a suspension strap headband system here, and it's actually, it's really nice. It's got a good amount of clamp to it without being super tight. It doesn't really slide around the head at all. It has enough twisting motion here, and there to fit alongside the head well. Like, the inside of the ear cups is big enough for a good number of ears. Like, it pretty much fully encases my basically average size earlobes here. Okay, it has this very unique pad shape. Okay, I think you can see that, where the pads are forward angled and they are top-down angled. Okay, so they are thicker in the back than they are in the front, and then they are thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. And so that creates a very interesting shape, but it actually contours to the head very well. And honestly, the combination of the headband system and design here and the amount of clamp force in this pad design and the amount of ear opening size, this is, of any price, one of the more comfortable headphones that I have worn. And I have had a good number of them on my head at this point. So kudos to the team at Sivga for designing a product that fits on the head well and is comfortable to wear for extended periods of time. It also has a rated mass of 318 grams, so it's not particularly heavy, which also aids in that comfort. Okay, the drivers in here, again, 300 ohms, but they are also, let's see, Sivga says they call it the drivers are made of an LCP composite material. I don't know what that LCP stands for, but is beryllium coated. Okay, so we have some of the advantages of the rigidity to low mass ratio that comes with beryllium going on in here. The cups are made of a very nice looking and feeling walnut. Okay, so this is a wood cup made out of walnut, and I think it looks nice, and it's well polished. It's smooth to the touch. I mean, it's so smooth and all that, I almost thought it was plastic at first, but it is wood. Okay, then on the bottom we have dual cable entry, detachable cable entry jacks there. These are 2.5 millimeter jacks there on the cup. So let me show you the cable while we're on that. The stock cable then, unsurprisingly, has dual 2.5 millimeter plugs here, TS plugs on the headphone end, and it has this nice braid to it, which actually doesn't tangle all that much. It does kind of loop around on itself like this every now and then, but it's pretty easy to straighten that out, okay? So it's a fairly ergonomically friendly cable that way. On the amp end, we have this 4.4 millimeter Pentacon balanced connector here. Now, I sort of understand this, and I also sort of don't. Okay, the reason I understand this is I know that a lot of balanced connectors and balanced devices are moving towards Pentacon, these 4.4 millimeter Pentacon headphone outputs, because they do save space, and they also can be adapted to single-ended connectors safely because of the shared ground on the sleeve down here. Okay, so there are advantages to that. Now, Sivga includes this adapter right here, which is a female 4.4 millimeter Pentacon jack here, connected to a 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch TRS single-ended plug on the amp end here. All right. Again, the cable is nice to use. I don't really have any ergonomic complaints in the use of it, other than I really would have liked to have seen a 1/4 inch TRS plug, single-ended plug in here somewhere. And the reason for that is because this is, again, a 300 ohm headphone. So there are a lot of people who are going to want to plug this into a tube amplifier. And the vast majority of tube amps out there, at any price, really, primarily use 1/4 inch or 6.35 millimeter TRS plugs as headphone outputs. So to use this cable to plug this headphone into a tube amp like that, you need a train of adapters here. You need to convert the Pentacon to a single-ended, and then you need another 1/4 inch adapter on the end of this thing, which is not included in the package, at least not that I got, to plug this into a tube amp. So I think that was one small oversight, maybe not so small oversight, in the ergonomic packaging, okay, of this headphone. On the subject of packaging, okay, here is the case that the headphone comes in. Okay, yes, we've seen images of Sivga cases around. We know that this looks like a butt, okay, a baby's butt specifically, because it's about that size. right? But other than that, it's a pretty high quality case right here that'll protect this well. The zipper works nicely. I can show you the inside here real quick. We just kind of have this black kind of sort of felt lined inside, and then the stock cabling came in this canvas pouch right here. All right, now, if the fact that this looks like a baby's butt offends you, don't worry, you can simply turn the case around and oops, never mind, it's the same thing on that side too. All right, moving on. All right, so, I mean, to sum it up, like, the build on this thing is quite good. It's got a nice build quality, a nice fit and finish to it. So it's, for a $450 headphone, I really have no complaints, and I think the comfort, again, is absolutely standout. And then my only real quibble is not even with the headphone itself from an ergonomic standpoint, just somehow getting a little bit less cumbersome and adaptery 6.35 millimeter single-ended connector from the cabling would have been a nice touch given the strong temptation people are going to have to plug this into tube amplifiers. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into the sound of this then, and as always, we will begin with test gear. So I tried this on a variety of signal chains. I did a review recently of the iFi Uno little DAC amp, plugged this into that. Okay, let's see, I used a entry-level stack of the Topping D10, the original Topping D10 DAC, plugged into a Monolith Liquid Spark headphone amp, and plugged this into there. Let's see. I also, on my desk system, I used the Canon HA1A Mark II tube amp, okay, with this a lot, again, 300 ohms. And it also got some time on my Bioelectric HPA V281 amplifier. And then the DACs I used for that would have been my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 for some, and then some more price-appropriate DACs like the Musician Draco got some run on this, and the SMSL VMV D1SE, which is also in for review, okay? Got some run on there too as the DAC for this. Okay. So then let's get into the sound proper. What kind of sound signature can you expect from this thing from a frequency response standpoint? And neutral is the first word that comes to mind. The frequency response on this is fairly even, and there is not much in the way of emphasis or de-emphasis in any major part of the frequency spectrum to my ear, with the slight exception maybe of just a little bit of excess energy in the upper mids, lower treble. Not terribly so, not enough that my ears, which do not tolerate that range very well, freak out and hear a lot of shout and honk, but just enough that over time and, you know, at higher volumes, not ridiculous volumes, but, you know, in my, you know, 72, 73-ish dB average listening level, that range can get fatiguing after a little while. Okay, so it puts just a little bit of bite, okay, in the upper mids, lower treble, but again, it is not terrible. I have low tolerance for that sort of thing in that frequency range, so many people may not notice that or ever care. Okay, the bass extension here is pretty good. I would say that for an open back dynamic driver headphone, the bass extension is above average, particularly for those that are sub $500. It doesn't dig super, super deep, but it gives you some meaningful grunt down pretty low. Okay, so even though it is not a bassy nor a bass-focused headphone, it still does a good job of rumbling down low enough to be reasonably convincing most of the time. Okay, there is a bit of an exception to that, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay, there is a fair amount of air and upper frequency extension too, but again, it's not elevated. So if you are treble sensitive, at least upper treble sensitive, you're probably going to have a decent chance that with this one, you know, getting some nice air and all of that without being fatigued all of that quickly. Okay. And then, yeah, so good even frequency response with good frequency extension, just a little bit of extra energy in the upper mids, lower treble, but not horribly so, and not so much that it totally derails timbre or tonal balance through that range for these ears that are super sensitive, or at least have low tolerance for that sort of behavior in that area. Okay. Now, the presentation here then, like, let's talk spatial presentation. So it's a big soundstage. It gets a pretty big, wide soundstage that is mostly out in front. There is a little bit of depth, so it's not quite fully wall of sound, but it's not going to be super deep. But that's pretty common for headphones in this price range. A lot of them struggle with depth there. Okay, but from side to side and even a little bit in the height, like, there's a pretty convincing spatial presentation, wide with pretty solid imaging and then separation between spatial images there. So that's I would say a strength here as well. Now, timbre. The timbre here is pretty good. For the most part, human voices sound convincingly lifelike, again, for the price and for what it is. And so do a lot of acoustic instruments, like acoustic guitars, pianos, horns, stringed instruments, things like that. For the most part, sound fairly natural. The upper mid-range / lower treble forwardness can put just a little bit of bite on things every now and then, and cause some brass instruments in particular to be a little bit blary here and there. But it was not a super common problem, and there are likely to be a good number of listeners out there that just don't ever hear that. Okay, so that would be the one area I think where timbre gets a little bit questionable. Another area maybe for some is that some might find the treble just to be a hair brittle. It didn't bother me, but I can see that the treble presentation here might be a little bit too thin sounding, in terms of not sounding very natural, just a little bit tizzy, if you will, for some. Okay, but I don't think very many will hear that. Okay, so that's all good too. The dynamics here, like the physicality, the impact, the slam, how hard it hits or how snappy it is through the mids and all of that, is not super standout, but it's not poor. Like, it's not a particularly hard-hitting, overly macrodynamic, impactful headphone, but nor does it lack that trait so much that it feels like it's at all blunted in that way too. So I think it strikes a good balance there. I think they're kind of going for have enough of it there to not be distracting, and then also not have so little of it that it just feels dull. So it strikes a nice balance there, particularly for long listening sessions. Okay, so I think on the whole, there is really a lot going for this thing sonically. And so then we need to get to two quibbles that I have with the sound here. And the first one I've already mentioned, and it is that for me, there is that little bit of upper, mid, lower treble forwardness that doesn't severely impact timbre. I mean, it does a little bit, but it's not horrible. But I do find it fatiguing. And then there are some genres of music that it can just be a little bit too over-aggressive. So a lot of loud brass instruments is one. A lot of aggressively played electric guitar, like in heavy metal. So a lot of Metallica, a lot of Mastodon, other kinds of metal genres or hard rock, where you have aggressively played distorted electric guitars right in that range. These can be all the more fatiguing, all the more quickly, and I don't think they are matched well to genres like that for that reason. Okay, so that's one quibble that I have with the sound. The other major quibble that I have with the sound is that while it's not super common, and there are likely to be some people that never really notice because of the kind of music they listen to, is that there is a fair amount of bass distortion here. You get down below 100 hertz or so, and you put a lot of low bass energy below 100 hertz in the music, and you play it fast, okay, and expect this to do a lot of very quick pitch changes, but all really low in the sub bass there, then you can really hear the distortion. Okay, what do I mean by that? The track where this really stood out the most was Why So Serious by Hans Zimmer from the Dark Knight film soundtrack. So at about 3.5 minutes in that track, there is a synthesized bass line that comes in that is super, super deep. Like it reaches way down in frequency, but it also like has a pulsating rhythm to it, and then it changes pitch a lot in there too. So if your gear is one notey, that track's going to show it off. If it's sloppy in the bass, that track is going to show it off, right? So unfortunately, that happened a little bit on this headphone where there was really noticeable distortion through that synthesized bass line on that track. And it was the kind of distortion that sounds like a driver that is just being overtaxed. So you've probably, known that high school kid somewhere who has the subwoofers in their trunk, right? And the subwoofers are hitting hard and they're rattling and you can hear the whole trunk rattle, right? That's not quite what I'm talking about here, but you've probably also heard like in a car stereo or anywhere where the drivers of those car speakers get overtaxed in the bass. They can have kind of that papery sounding breakup. A similar sonic effect is happening on that Why So Serious track during that really low synthesized bass line on this headphone. This one just cannot handle it. And it's not one driver, it's not a driver issue on this headphone because it's happening the same on both sides. It just, these drivers in this headphone cannot handle that track or similar, okay, the way that it needs to be. Now, for most music, you're again not going to hear that distortion in the bass, or at least it's not going to be overly forward or noticeable in the way that it is on Why So Serious. Okay, like most music that I listened to that had like say hard kick drum hits and all of that, it would only sound a little bit sloppier in the mid bass. And that's only when I would direct A/B, a quick switch between this headphone and like either of these two here real quick, is when that would show up. Is like kick drum hits just sounded a little bit splashier, sloppier overall. They weren't quite as clean or clear on the initial hit, and then they lingered just a little bit longer than on other headphones, which didn't sound quite right. Now again, the vast majority of the time, if you're just listening to this headphone, you're probably not going to notice that. And even I really only ever noticed that, again, in quick switch scenarios, going from this one to one of these, okay, when I got to the comparisons there. So that's my other sonic quibble. Okay, so again, overall, really like the total sonic package here, especially for like mellower acoustic music, jazz, a lot of classical that's not overly brass heavy, okay, things like that. Even some classic rock or singer-songwriter kinds of genres, folk rock, okay, those sorts of things. Really compelling sonic package here. Struggles a bit when you get into music that requires a lot of really low and also fast-moving bass. And then if there's a lot of aggressive energy, like there is in a lot of heavy metal with distorted electric guitars, the slight upper, mid, lower treble forwardness puts a little bit of a bite on the sound, which I find fatiguing. You may not. Okay. Let's get into the comparisons with these two then. Now, I know that a $450 open back headphone is going to beg for all kinds of comparisons with other products, like even the Hi-Fi-Man Sundara. Somebody is going to ask me how this compares to that. I don't know yet. I do have a Sundara in from Hi-Fi-Man that I just have not gotten to yet because I've had a lot of stuff to review. But I think that these, we'll just compare the Sivga to these two, because I think, again, this one, because of the 300 ohm impedance, is like trying to get into the game that these two are playing. Okay, so how does it compare to these two? Well, let's talk about tube amping, first of all, because these two, along with their their sibling models, are known for performing really well on tube amps, and they do. This one, the HD600 series, is really known for lighting up on tube amps. This one is no exception. The DT880 here mellows out a little bit up top and also just becomes like a warmer, smoother, more inviting headphone on most tube amps as well, particularly more price appropriate tube amps. The Sivga here does not change its character quite as much moving from solid state to tube. It still sounds really good on tube amps, but it's not really a headphone that needs them. Okay, I would argue the Senn HD600 series needs tube amps to really understand what makes that, particularly the 600, the 650, the 6XX, not so much the 660S. Okay, but the 600, 650, 6XX, that you like really need a tube amp to understand what makes those so special. This one is not as essential to have a tube amp with. Like, you can get some good solid states with it, even in the price range, but you still like get another flavor of this one from a tube amp. Okay, and its spatial presentation, I think, becomes increasingly holographic off of tubes as well. This one here, the Sivga, sounds pretty much the same, solid state versus tube. Now, does that mean that you should not use it with a tube amp? No. Okay. Of course not, because the nice thing about this being 300 ohms means that you can, it does work well with tube amps, particularly output transformerless or OTL tube amps. Again, it's not going to completely change its character, but if you have an OTL tube amp, like a Bottlehead Crack, okay, like a Felix Echo, like even a Dark Voice, okay, something like that that you like, that you don't have a lot of headphones to listen to on, you can get this and plug it into that tube amp and use your nice tube amp that you like. It's just, again, it's not going to completely transform like this one does or have as noticeable a change as even this one does. Okay. So moving on from that, the sonic characters of these things, and I did these comparisons mostly right off of the K and HA1A Mark II tube amp, is that this one is sort of a blend of some of the qualities of these two. So none of these three are in, say, direct competition with each other because they all do something a little bit different and unique that is going to have trade-offs. It's going to appeal to some and not as much to others. Like, for example, the 6XX just has ridiculously good mid-range timbre. Like, you just cannot beat its mid-range timbre for the price. That includes the Sivga, okay? It's not going to touch the mid-range timbre of this one. This one is also more physical. It has like more bass punch in the mid-bass than this one or the Beyer, okay? But it also has its trade backs, right? It has that kind of intimate soundstage and then that 3-blob spatial presentation of left, center, right, and not a lot in between that, okay, this HD600 series is known for, okay? So there are drawbacks to that one too. Okay, the DT880, bigger soundstage, but it has that neutral bright presentation to it or frequency response to it, which can be fatiguing to people. And also the treble can be really hard to control. So this is a bit amp picky, right? And probably the amp pickiest, I would say, in terms of not doing things wrong of these three. It has a little bit better deep bass extension than the SV023 does, but again, it's more forward in the upper treble, and I think, it does not have an upper, mid, lower treble forwardness, so I prefer its mid timbre over this one just a little bit. Okay, I think this one might also be just a hair more accurate in its imaging and its separation, but it's close. All right. The SV023 here stages, images, separates, does spatial things much more closely to the way the Beyer does it, which is a strength of the Beyer, okay, and is therefore way ahead of the Senn, okay, in that regard too. All right. This one has probably the most overall neutral tuning of these three. So neutral bright, or excuse me, neutral warm, neutral bright, neutral with just a hair of slight upper, mid, lower treble forwardness. Okay, all that. Now, These two don't have the bass distortion issue that I was talking about with this one. Okay, so that to me is, again, that gets into the drawbacks here. We're overall very compelling sonic package on this one. Okay, minus that bass distortion and minus that slight upper mid, lower treble forwardness. Okay, so there we go. Just, yeah, so all three of these are really solid options. There isn't a best here and there isn't a worst here. There's just, they each have their own sonic packages that where there are trade-offs, and each one is going to work best for some users in some situations, right? So that, I think, actually is a high compliment to the SV023. To say that it can stand with these in terms of performance says a lot, because these two are legends, okay, in our hobby for good reason. Okay, and so there are going to be people that hear this sonic presentation and they hear something closer to the spatial presentation of the Beyer, but something that's a little bit more forgiving for most music genres, you know, like the Senn is. And then there's going to be the comfort with that, and they're going to say, oh, hey, there's a lot to like here, and they're right. Okay? So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. The Sivga SV023, okay, surprised me. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. It is not perfect. That cabling connector thing, I really would like to see a 1/4-inch connection come in the box that isn't a string of adapters, so that you can more comfortably plug this into tube amps. Okay, but the sonic package here is really good with a nice big soundstage, fairly decent imaging and separation, mostly neutral frequency response. Okay, enough dynamics to not sound flat, but then also to not be overly aggressive also. And then just the minor quibbles of just a hair of forwardness in the upper mids, lower treble that can give it some bite that I found fatiguing, but not everyone will. And then just a little bit of distortion down in the sub bass on most music genres, which most people are not really going to notice with most music, but if you are into super bass heavy that has very deep active sub bass, you probably will. All right, so I will leave it there. Okay, pretty nice job on this headphone here, so good job, Sivga. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Sivga SV023. If you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please do that, and please like this video, please leave a comment down below, please check out my PayPal, my Patreon, and do all of those things that you do to support YouTube channels, links in the description. So thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.